With Star Trek Enterprise's ratings steadily dwindling, the powers that be decided to up the game of the show in a desperate bid to keep Star Trek alive. Seasons 3 and 4 of the show would themselves become a soft reboot for Enterprise, but the true changes to the series would start here with this episode, Regeneration. Hello and welcome to Backtrack, a web series that focuses on the background information of any given topic in Star Trek. In this video, we're taking a look at Star Trek Enterprise's episode Regeneration, in an effort to better understand this unexpected episode's place in Star Trek history. I hope you enjoy. Well, it's been a long road getting from there to here. For all intents and purposes, Star Trek Enterprise was a failure for the franchise. Its obvious cookie-cutter approach to Trek, mimicking Star Trek The Next Generation and Star Trek Voyager, would end up leading Star Trek to ruin. Rick Berman, who was once responsible for pulling TNG out of the depths of despair with his innovative and fresh approach to Star Trek, had become old and disconnected from the fanbase around him, much the same way he had accused Gene Roddenberry of being during the first season of TNG. But this time, not even the great Manny Coto could pull Star Trek from the recycling bin. Star Trek Voyager, for all its flaws, still did okay with fans and viewership ratings, though only getting about 50% of the viewership numbers that both TNG and Deep Space Nine enjoyed. Broken Bow, the premiere episode of Star Trek Enterprise, had an amazing start, getting 12.5 million viewers for that episode. Fandom was willing at the beginning to give Enterprise a chance, as once again, just like Star Trek Voyager, we were all promised a brand new, different, and fresh take for the franchise. Unlike Star Trek Voyager, however, fandom was no longer willing to accept a false promise, and as it was soon clear that Enterprise was nothing more than the same thing fandom had already seen time and time again, Enterprise's numbers plummeted. Those hardened Enterprise fans out there are most likely typing their little fingers off at warp speed right now, wanting to let everyone know that the reason Enterprise failed was simply because it was on UPN as a flagship show. But this is not entirely correct. Again, Star Trek Voyager had the same arrangement as Enterprise, and again, fans watched Voyager on UPN. They simply didn't watch Enterprise. Heading into Season 2 of the series, Enterprise's ratings were still in decline, only getting an average of between 4 and 5 million views, and the powers that be decided to give Rick Berman an ultimatum. Shake up the show, bring up the viewership numbers, or Enterprise will be cancelled. In a bid to regain the faith Paramount had placed in him, Berman began to get his team of writers to come up with fresh new ideas for Season 3 of the show, while also shaking up the end of Season 2. But, as though to prove fandom fears about Berman heading up Trek for far too long, Berman decided to pull out an overused trick from his dusty bag, bringing the Borg to Enterprise. Written by Mike Sussman and Phyllis Strong, Regeneration would revisit the kooky cybernetic lifeforms and once again rewrite the Borg's first encounter with humanity. Mike Sussman was an avid fan of Star Trek long before he became a writer and producer for the show. Overall, Sussman would write or co-write more than 30 episodes for both Star Trek Voyager and Star Trek Enterprise, and overall he did some solid work, though by far his best work would have to be Enterprise's 4th season 2-part episode, In a Mirror Darkly. Phyllis Strong, for her part, was also no stranger to Star Trek, writing several episodes of Voyager and Enterprise, even becoming story editor for both series. Together, these two writers would put together a solid outing for Star Trek Enterprise, utilizing the Borg while not making a complete disaster of the episode. And David Livingston, the director of this episode, would bring all his massive talents to bear on the episode to ensure its relative success. Livingston directed 62 episodes for all 4 of the Berman-era Star Trek series. Everyone wanted this Borg episode to have the same feel as TNG's Q-Who, where the Borg were introduced to a captive audience. And in theory, this approach made sense, As for our fledgling Enterprise crew, this was truly their first meeting with the Borg, not having an inkling of their very existence to begin with. The problem, though, was the audience was very familiar with the Borg, far too familiar really, as Star Trek Voyager would take the Borg from super threat down to alien of the week throughout its run. So, as a starting point for the episode, the writers were already behind the 8-ball. Also, the general production staff for Enterprise thought doing a Borg episode was a downright horrible idea. Production illustrator and starship designer extraordinaire John Eaves had this to say about it. Everyone in the art department started to read the little teaser and we all gasped in horror at about the same time. The Borg? No! We all were not feeling too happy about this new TNG alien showing up in an episode of Enterprise even before Captain Kirk. I thought, well, this will throw all lines of Trek history out the window. Still, there was something to be said about a sequel to First Contact, and that's the approach the writers would take for this episode. Again, being a logical and amazing idea, though once put to practice would cause many issues in itself. Fandom would end up extremely divided and up in arms over Regeneration, many feeling, as Eaves did, that canon was being thrown out the window in favor of Berman's search for ratings. If you stop to think about the episode for a moment with unbiased eyes, some of these major problems become clear. The first being, why is there a crashed Borg sphere in the Arctic Circle to begin with? Assuming the Enterprise E's quantum torpedoes had done a fairly good job on the sphere, which seems to be the case when watching First Contact, then you have the problem of components burning up in the atmosphere. So you have to assume that that isn't a problem at all. Then you have the issue of the Borg sphere being destroyed over Montana in North America. So how did all those pieces end up crashing into the Arctic Circle in such a small and concentrated area? But even if you accept all that happening, then you have what's probably the biggest issue of all. Why would the Enterprise E leave for the 24th century without ensuring that any possible contamination to the timeline had been cleaned up as best they could? Are we really to believe that Captain Jean-Luc Picard and the intrepid crew of the Enterprise E wouldn't consider debris in orbit or on the planet as a big issue? Then you have all the other problems, such as how did a Borg drone survive impact, freezing, and then simply thawed out to wreak havoc in the 22nd century like nothing had happened? Or how about the Borg's greeting to the NX crew, which is mysteriously lacking their regular "We are the Borg" tagline? What about Phlox's cure for Borg assimilation? I mean, sure, no one knows to make a medical log with the heading Borg Cure, but surely Starfleet would keep a record of this amazing and scary encounter. So why does none of Starfleet's best and brightest do a simple Google search on past encounters with cybernetic life forms, even if it was simply to see how others dealt with similar problems, and then connect the dots to the Borg after Picard's first encounter in Q Who? Why do phase pistols, a technologically inferior version of phasers, which the Borg know all about, suddenly work better than their phaser counterparts do in the future? And these are only but a few problems that fandom would cite about the episode. But I'm sure you can see why this would be a huge problem for some within the fan community, leading many in fandom to declare this episode as jumping the shark for the series. For my part, I actually enjoyed this episode. While watching it, I was swept up in the narrative, and I didn't notice any of the issues that would have fandom in an uproar. It wasn't until my second viewing, years later, that I began to understand what was wrong. Ratings for Regeneration did in fact go up, though not by much. Enterprise, which at the time was averaging about 3.2 million viewers, would have Regeneration bring it up to 4.1 million viewers. Hardly the flocking return of fandom Berman was hoping for. Nevertheless, for a Season 2 episode of Enterprise, it was a solid outing, and one of the best of that season, even if A Night in Sickbay did an overall better job of getting fandom to tune in. Season 3 of Enterprise would see numerous changes made to the series and its overall format, including a season-long story arc, and the word Star Trek added to Enterprise's title credits. But the underlying problem still remained. Rick Berman was again still in charge of Star Trek. And I believe that if Star Trek Enterprise had debuted about 5 years after Voyager had ended, and a fresh new showrunner such as Manny Coto had it from the get-go, Paramount having retired Berman with full honors, that Enterprise might have succeeded, and taken us into the future like TNG had back in its day. Alas though, that was not to be the fate of Enterprise. Instead, she holds the rating, still to this day, of the least liked Star Trek live-action series ever created. And for me that's unfortunate, as when rewatching the series, I actually really enjoy it. So the me of today actually applauds them for trying to step outside the box with Regeneration, and although not a shining beacon of Trek storytelling, it is in fact a fun outing, earning this episode its place in Star Trek history.
They are possessed of one mind.
You will be assimilated.
Driven by one will. And intent on destroying one ship.
They're charging weapons. Now!
Prepare for Enterprise's first encounter with the Borg.
Keep firing!
In the 1-hour Star Trek event, where resistance is futile.
We've been boarded.
Next Star Trek Enterprise.
Thank you for watching today's episode of Backtrek. What do you think of Regeneration? Do you see this episode as jumping the shark, with too many canon problems to make it enjoyable? Well, leave your comments in the section below, and don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel, hitting that little bell icon so you won't miss a single video we release. Want to help the channel not crash into the Arctic Circle after being shot down over America? Then consider becoming a channel patron. The link to our Patreon account is in the description below. Thanks again for watching. Resistance is futile.